Hi, everyone. Welcome to Proust podcast number 19. We say that confidently. It might be not number 19, but we'll pretend that it is for the sake of this chat. And we're really excited that we have another guest, a returning guest. I think perhaps our first returning guest, Katie, on the podcast. And this is Dr. Katie Cross. So we're going to be talking a number of things. We're going to be talking Katie's now completed research project, which we already spent some time talking about last May in podcast number. Any ideas, Rob?
5 or 6, I think it was.
Ish. It'd be something like that. Yeah.
We were,
so yeah, we talked a lot about the at that stage, the research was still underway. So now that it has come to a conclusion. So we thought we really wanted to talk about, okay, what has come out of that so far? And there's lots of exciting things about the way people are responding to that. And Kate is inviting some creative responses, which we'll hear about later too. But having talked about that, we're also going to spend a bit of time talking about the Quiet Revival, which I guess some of our listeners will have heard about and come across in other formats. So yeah, that's what we've got lined up. Just before we do that, though, I want to give a plug to one more thing. We are planning a Proust meetup weekend. This has been in planning stage now for quite a few months. We're really, really excited that we have now a firm plan. Between the 3rd and the 5th of October, we'll be meeting in Glasgow, in and around St Oswald's Episcopal Church at Kings Park near Castlemilk. So they're hosting us along with that group of churches, the Episcopal churches that St Oswald's belongs to, and also a neighbouring Church of Scotland church will be hosting some elements of it. And the idea really is to kind of use that space and time just to bring together people to be creative with one another. And as part of that, we will use that creativity to make a happening which members of the community will be invited to. There will be a ceilidh, so traditional Scottish kind of ceilidh, where hopefully there's lots of fun things like poetry and song, as well as just the dancing. It will cost nothing to attend. Obviously, there will be costs for people attending because accommodation and travel will be part of that. We're going to even try and feed people for more meals than not. If you are struggling, or if you're not struggling and actually would value the opportunity to have some accommodation provided, some of the host churches are also offering to lay on some accommodation. So really, there is no reason not to come, is there? Really, I mean, come on, it's free. It's going to be fun. We're going to fill a field behind the church full of mushrooms. You know, there'll be live raku firings. There'll be music. There'll be, well, I don't quite know what there'll be, because actually what we need is artists to bring stuff along. So this is, I should mention one more thing, that this is themed around mycelium. That's the theme for the weekend. It's just as an analogy for connection, and if you've not read the mushroom book by what's his name, the son of the Sheldrake, Merlin Sheldrake's book. It is Merlin, isn't it? Because there's several Sheldrakes. An Entangled Life, is it? If you needed any inspiration for thinking about how mycelium is an analogy for deep connection, and how that maps entirely onto the certain kind of spirituality that we've often talked about on this podcast and elsewhere, then that's a good place to start. So that's enough from me.
If you want to just say, if people want to look it up, go to our website,
yes,
which is proust.community. So the community is instead of the com or the .co.uk. So it's proust.community. There is a page for mycelium. You can sign up there, or at least register your interest, or just add yourself to our mailing list, and then you'll receive information that way as well. So
that's very thanks, Rob, because I had forgotten that. There's as you go to the website, it will pop up as an option anyway, just on the site, just to then you'll be invited to kind of sign up for information only. You're not committing yourself to anything in doing that. Yeah. Okay then. Well, Katie, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me back. This is exciting.
It's very exciting for us too.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say you had me at live Roku firings. I think I'll have to.
Oh, there you go. Come along.
Come along and
that's what I've been doing all day, of course. So at the moment, my back is gone because I've been stooped all over a hot kiln most of the day. So, but yeah. So I'm going to hand over to Rob now, who's going to start some chat around where we're up to. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Chris. We last spoke last May, which is such a long time ago.
It is, yeah.
And at that time,
much longer.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's quite interesting because I re-listened to the podcast deliberately to try and remind myself of what we spoke about. It's in some extent quite scary because Gaza was still on the agenda, and it's even more so on the agenda this week. There were things like the structure and the patriarchy of traditional church models, and only in today's news I saw that the Welsh Church have appointed a first female leader, and I thought, well, I wonder, actually, in many ways, I'd be really interested to know what you think about that, whether that potentially changes structure or has the potential to change structure. And I'm going to start rambling, so Katie, please talk and interrupt me.
Oh, goodness, what a tricky one to start with. I actually have a little bit of experience of this because the job that I do, which is I'm a lecturer at the University of Aberdeen in the north of Scotland, and I'm the first woman on record to hold my role as well. And there's something about that that's really good for pushing things forward, but there's also a kind of, I suppose, a sense that if you don't tend to structural issues, that doesn't matter. So you need to be doing a bit of both, appoint more kind of diverse folk into roles, but also be thinking about the structure of things at the same time.
Is it a brave thing to do? Or is it a necessary thing to do? Is that perhaps a better word?
Would that be for the person being appointed or doing the
for the
appointing,
institution to appoint to appoint the first female? Is that?
Come on, it's 2025.
Exactly. It sounds like obviously the right thing to do.
Move with the times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you say that, but it's taken many 100 years to do it.
I know, that's right. That's absolutely right. I think I just look at it and go, oh, come on, of course, that makes so much sense. But I suppose if you're in that role, then maybe there are other reasons why that hasn't happened. But I think, again, I look at it and see a lot of structural inequality, and we need to be challenging that. So come on, let's go. It's 2025.
Absolutely. Yeah. So last May, you'd sent out a survey to church leavers, and at the time you had about 500 or so responses, of which you'd interviewed about 50. So
that's right.
How has that developed in the last year and a bit?
That's a good question. So yes, I had gone on and interviewed I think about 50 of the people who had either said that they were up for being interviewed or who had done the survey. And it took me quite a long time to get through all of the survey data because it wasn't just numbers and charts and things like that. It was people's kind of long answers that they were giving about their faith and leaving church. And so that took quite a long time to go through it all. I think it was, when I closed it, it was about 600 or so responses. So what I've been doing, I've just been kind of spending time with all the information that I collected. I've been writing some of it up. I've been taking those ideas to conferences and other places and trying to kind of get a bit of feedback on them as well. And then I've done a couple of things. So the thing about the research I'm doing is it has to be for church leavers. It can't just be about what I want to do or what I think looks good. So I'm trying to keep people really involved in it. And to do that, I sent out a copy of the findings of the research to everybody that I had spoken to. And then there was a bit of a consultation period where people wrote back and said, yes, this looks correct, or I just have a question about this, or in one case, none of this makes any sense. I didn't say any of it, therefore none of it's true. So that was interesting. It was, I think, somebody trying to, who was wondering why I hadn't represented only their views when I had quite a few more to think about. So that's fine. Now there's a kind of new phase of the research, which Chris touched on. So I'm doing a kind of creative thing with it.
Right.
So the idea is that we get people to respond in ways that are kind of reflective and creative rather than just me asking questions.
Okay.
So I've designed some prompts that are based on what I found, and we're trying to get people to kind of engage with those. So last night I had a bit of a chat with a few people about those prompts, and we were talking through things like, one of the big findings I have is about the sort of secular sacred divide, right? Does that actually exist, and where do we find God in ways that are not just in church? And we also had a conversation about what it might look if the church dies out. So one of the things I invited them to do is maybe to write a eulogy for a dying church, or to compile things that, kind of represent their journey, and whether those be kind of photographs or items or poetry or, yeah. So that's kind of where we are at the moment.
So if somebody wants to, is this response open to anybody?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think initially what I have done is I've offered it to people that I interviewed, but yes.
So if they want to respond or want to take part in that, how would they do that?
I think we could maybe put some information on the Proust website if you'd be willing. But the best way is to just get in touch with me directly. So you can email me. My email is k.cross@abdn.ac.uk.
I think, by the way, there is already some information on the Proust blog about this.
Yes, I think there might be.
Yes, so there's a few different ways that people can get involved, isn't there? So I think we have tried to kind of put that out there, but we can certainly kind of give it a plug by some other means as well.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Yes, if you're listening and that sounds interesting to you, then yeah, fantastic.
So, thanks, Katie. Can you give us an indication of some of the findings? Is that possible?
Definitely. How long have you got?
Quite a long time absolutely. At the moment.
I think we there's kind of two. There's two. Honestly, I could talk all night. There's sort of two main things that I wanted to find out. I'll tell you a bit about. So the first was just about why people leave. What's the reason? And there is a real mixture of reasons. If you haven't seen it before, Steve Afer did some work on this a few years ago with his project, which was published as The Invisible Church. And Steve really laid the ground for a lot of this. So interestingly, I did find a lot of what he found is still holding true. So a kind of slow drip feed of problems that come to a head. Sometimes, people leave because they get annoyed and things build up. But to go back to what we were kind of talking about at the start, I also found quite a lot of evidence for sort of large scale systemic issues. The working kind of phrase that I have for that is institutional sin. And the kind of key thing about that is it's not necessarily Christian ideas, but behaviours of people in church that kind of shape the biases of the institution. So things like control and power, an awful lot of safeguarding issues coming out of particularly the Church of England at the moment, issues of discrimination as well, plenty of those that were kind of coming to the fore. So people's lived experience of feeling that the church wasn't there for them, a lack of care, people from various kind of groups, people who were experiencing homophobia, transphobia, a lot of misogyny, being pushed out of roles for reasons of racism or other kinds of discrimination. There was an awful lot on the lived experience of disability and ableism, excluding people from worship services. So that all is really difficult. As well as those really big things, quite a lot of circumstantial reasons that people left church too, right? So just when it gets really heavy, pandemic comes into a lot. Yeah. So COVID-19 giving people a bit of a chance to reevaluate and maybe say, church is not for me anymore. Other people had just moved. They had time commitments or family commitments, or a few people had a lack of transport or just sort of fell out of the habit. I was thinking, there's one woman said to me, I haven't got some like big church trauma. I just sort of left slowly. And then the pandemic really sealed it. And that's why she left. Yeah. So that was kind of one big one. And you could break that down into lots and lots of findings, couldn't you, really?
Can I just kind of pick up on that for a moment?
Yeah.
Robert, okay. Just because I suppose the list of reasons for leaving that you gave, apart from the specifics of the pandemic, none of them are new, are they?
Not really.
And so I'm wondering again if, in trying to understand the leaving, whether what you're giving is precipitating factors to something else. Do you know what I mean? That's the point at which people have left. That might even be the reason that people have left. But the continual declining numbers of people and the larger numbers of people who are leaving.
Yeah.
You know, if those factors are not new, does that suggest to you then that there is a wider story here? And is the research uncovering that as well?
I think so. I think that would be fair to say. And I think it's that they are kind of age-old reasons. Some of them are just very human and they're not really to do with religious groups at all. So I did a previous study on an atheist church called the Sunday Assembly. And when people left that particular community, it was really similar set of reasons. Not all quite as intense as what I've just named, but quite a few of them were similar. I think what I found was, so for example, with things like racism, quite a lot more detail on things like Black Lives Matter and the specifics of how were churches responding to things like the kind of rise of Black Lives Matter in the UK, thinking about enslavement or thinking about how their church had maybe benefited from the slave trade. So those kinds of questions, which are old issues, but coming around in a sort of new way. And the same with things like misogyny and transphobia and homophobia were really tied to politics. I was finding quite a lot, so either church politics or wider politics as well, and just the landscape that's changing. Interestingly, quite a few people did speak about whether the church was doing enough in terms of their own political stance. There's quite a lot of that too. And again, that's nothing new. That's something I've written about before. So I have a sense that there's a set of reasons and a set of kind of obvious things that are happening. So none of it I don't think is I think it's shocking in the sense that it is harder to read than maybe I would have thought it would be. But nothing should be surprising. I think you're right.
Harder to read?
It's interesting.
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah.
In terms of the brutality of the stories, are you talking about?
I think so. I think so. And also to hear, because I heard them before I sat down and reread them. But when you read them all together and you kind of see it all together, it sounds pretty dire. I mean, it really does. It kind of reads in a really difficult way. And that was tricky because the one person who did push back said to me, what's, your own bias here? And I was like, well, yes. First of all, absolutely. But when there's so much going on structurally, it's tricky to just tie that to bias. After a while, I think you have to really investigate what's going on and kind of tap down into it, don't you?
Okay.
It occurs to me, that one of the issues that's around so much at the moment is the degree of polarization that happens on everything. So, just wading through at the moment, sort of all the stuff around immigrants and all the protests that are happening about hotels and things, and the degree to which any issue is instantly polarized into us and them and good and bad, and this is correct and this is not correct. So I'm listening to your list of potential leaving issues again. They sound to me, from my kind of radical communist, almost left-wing perspective, to map very much onto my demographic.
Yeah.
Is that a problem for the research? Do you know what I mean? Are we gathering people that are like us in this?
Like an echo chamber type.
I do wonder about that, and I think it's good to name that. Yeah, it's good to name that. It's really important to, actually, I think. I mean, there's some evidence of that in that a lot of the people that I spoke to, we can probably talk about this later when we speak about community, but they name the communities they've gone into, and they tend to be quite left, sort of left-leaning politically, tend to be things like Extinction Rebellion or Christian Climate Action, things like that. I have a lot of Iona community members, and famously the Iona community has, yes, exactly, kind of more of a left-leaning slant to it. So there is that thought that I have when I read this, and I go, well, maybe this is a bit, we're going in one direction, it's a bit of an echo chamber. What I need to remind myself is I was really conscious about trying to find a diverse lot of people in terms of age and background and race and experience. And so while there is a lot that unites people, there's also an awful lot of difference between the people I'm speaking to as well. So if they've ended up politically fairly similar, that's one thing, but they do come from different backgrounds, and they are a fairly diverse chunk of people. So I've tried to mitigate that. It's not a perfect science, but that does kind of stand out to me as an interesting thing.
Sorry, Kate, remind us how you found them.
Yeah. I just, I did what all good researchers do, and I put a shout out on the internet. I did. I think I was still on Twitter, and I think I'd tweeted something about it and tried to get it shared. And then what I kind of did was, in order to really make sure that was a diverse amount of people and that I was really getting the people I wanted to, I would sort of find, as people were taking the survey, I would kind of watch it and make sure that the demographics were well enough represented. And when they weren't, I would follow that up, and I would go looking for people in different spaces. So I was quite intentional about actually kind of seeking people out and finding them, and kind of using contacts that I had, or kind of spreading the word in different ways across different platforms and things like that as well. Yeah.
So from a professional research point of view, you can say with some confidence that it's sound. Is that the right language?
I don't know about that. I mean, the thing is, with qualitative research, and you've caught me at a bad time because I'm reading a book about how all qualitative research is really unsound today. It's not a perfect science at all. Well, this is the tricky thing. As far as possible, I'm representing what I found from people. And part of the way I'm doing that is actually through a process which has a terrible name. So forgive me because you're going to laugh. In qualitative research, we call it member checking.
Okay.
And I know it sounds pretty dodgy, but member checking is the process. It does sound very bad. It's a process by which you go back to the people who have helped you do the research, and you ask them for feedback on the findings. So you kind of go through that process again. Now, not everybody does that. That's not, it should be the standard, I think. But to be able to do that and to get outside feedback as well from people is really helpful. So I take as many steps as I can. As an academic, I'm all about nuance. I'm not going to promise that it's completely unbiased. It can't be. But as far as possible, I'm trying to use methods that are helping me to get people's opinions, and people are helping me shape this so that it's not just me doing the research that I want to do.
It might be worth just as one of the reasons, I suppose, why we've found ourselves having this kind of conversation is because of this kind of thing, which we'll come on to talk to later, of the research done by the Bible Society, which has become known by the awful, awkward name of the Quiet Revival. So I suppose there's this interesting discussion about the trends that we're seeing of decline in membership of formal institutions, with some obvious exceptions. That your research is telling a story of some of the people that have been caught up on the edges of that. And I think what we're interested in. Oh, I seem to have lost Rob for a minute. Hopefully, he'll rejoin us. I suppose what we're really interested in is trying to kind of gather the learning from that as to how, because that in many ways that's also the demographic of the people that lots of people that have been involved in Proust. Not all of them clearly, but quite a few people have had that experience too.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. I actually had a really good conversation with one of my participants yesterday, and she gave me an absolute gem right at the end of the conversation, and she said to me, well, it's not just for people who've left church that the research is happening. It's also because there will be more people who leave church. So no one knows if they're still in church right now, if they might become a church leaver at some point, which I thought was really insightful. I'd never thought of that before. But yeah, absolutely.
So I suppose hopefully Rob will be back. I've just messaged me to say he suddenly lost us. I don't quite know what that means, but hopefully we'll be back. But I suppose that do we need to then think about that, accepting that this is the story, that these are the stories that you've uncovered. The next bit of the story, I assume, is then okay. Well, what happened to those people? What meaning? What meaning making do they still do? And are there any kind of commonalities around that are quite instructive?
Yeah, and I think there's an awful. Oh, hi, Rob. Welcome
Hello,
back.
Rob. Yes.
Hello.
Nice. You're in a different position on the screen as well, as if you. Well, I don't know. You must have pulled a plug.
Was that only me? How weird.
Yes,
Divine intervention.
Yes, yeah.
Oh.
It was God editing the podcast.
Oh dear. Sorry.
So I've just asked Katie to move in the general direction of talking about the meaning that people are making beyond having the institutions that they may have left behind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot here. There's an awful lot, and that was a really lovely part of the research was not just to think about why people are left, but also what they're doing now. And there's a real mixture of ongoing Christian practices. So people pray still, they contemplate, they create communities, they engage with activism. Occasionally they might still attend church. I allow for fluidity of church attendance. All those kinds of things make sense, right? Within the context of the research, I think it's some people leave forever for good. Some people go back and forth. And the activism was really interesting. Just the organic communities that people create, kind of like Proust. A lot of mention of things like Greenbelt, online church, online communities, friend groups that happen, and just kind of serve that purpose. A lot of really interesting research that I uncovered on prayer and contemplation as well. There's plenty about the way that people pray, prayer habits, but also the guilt and the uncertainty of continuing certain Christian practices or feeling like maybe they're just for church. So some people would say, I can pray, but I don't know if I can take Eucharist or communion because I'm not in a church anymore. Lots of contemplative prayer, things like that. What else are people doing? My goodness. Bible reading practices are varied. Some people just don't touch it anymore. Other people do things like spiritual direction, pilgrimage. I had a few people who did pilgrimage. And then there were a whole lot of other events and communities and resources that people kind of spoke about and named. And things like the Nomad podcast was in there. Proust was in there too. The Open Table Network, the work of Richard Rohr comes up an awful lot. Dave Tomlinson's Holy Shed and Soul Space events.
Oh yeah,
don't know if you've heard of them. Yep. Lectio 365, Red Letter Christians, lots of TESE services people were going to. Some people even kind of venture outside of Christianity, so they do things like Bible reading. I had one person who was reading the Bible next to the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita. Interesting. People who maybe don't think of God as God anymore, but God in a different shape, all those kinds of things. Other stuff as well, which I think might answer some of what you're asking, is this thing that, so Grace Davy, who's a sociologist, would call it vicarious religion. And a lot of sociologists have said, well, that doesn't seem like it's actually happening. And I think it is. It's when people go to church for kind of big events like Advent and Lent.
Yeah.
That is very much something that happens. Still, a lot of people would say I'm a cultural Christian. I go at Christmas and Easter. There's still contact with the church, things like that. Lots and lots of discussion about nature as well. So finding God in nature and the natural world, that came up an awful lot. So there's I would say a big tapestry of things that people do, even though they're not in church, to keep their faith alive. And the particular people that I've been interested in are people who've left church but are still Christians.
Yeah.
Are still happy to call themselves, if not Christians, then at least to say that they're religious.
Okay. Do you think they were doing these things whilst they were members of a church, or they've found new expressions or ways of doing it?
It's a good question. I think the answer to that is fairly blurry.
Okay.
So for some of them, yes, they would still have been doing those things while they were in church. For somebody that I spoke to a few days ago, they were naming what they do now as something that they now had the space for, the mental space for, now that they weren't in church.
Yeah.
So there's certainly a lot of that. Yeah. That just being in church was quite stressful and causing issues. And actually being outside of church, they could go away and kind of think about what they needed for their own faith.
Because those things that you've listed, all those examples, they strike me as they ought to be incompatible with
no, not
belonging
at all.
to a traditional church or any sort of community, should they?
No, absolutely not. No, I think there should be space for both. Some people do find that there is, but it's interesting. The same person that I spoke to said it's a more intentional practice now. So they would be going to church and sitting through a service and just kind of receiving what was there.
Yeah.
Whereas now they have to be a bit more thoughtful about finding things and looking for things.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how they'd described what they do. And I suppose I would have a similar experience to that.
Mm-hmm.
Katie, do you think that there's a theological shift that underpins this change? Have the fundamentals of people's doctrine changed alongside their leaving?
Yeah, I mean, it seems that can happen in some circumstances. So you have people who are deconstructing. It's quite a sort of American term, both academically and socially, the idea of deconstructing your faith and kind of moving away from more conservative ways of thinking. Some people haven't, though. Some people haven't had to deconstruct. It's just that they have maybe encountered, I suppose, I'm trying to think how the person I spoke to the other day had described it, but it's less of a deconstruction and more just of a kind of wider knowing of their faith that they maybe hadn't had before.
Okay.
So there's a sense that the institution, the traditional church, is limiting people's expression of their faith in some way.
Yeah, I think so. In some ways. Yeah, in some ways. And then I had quite a lot of kind of discussion with people around blame and shame and things like that. So even somebody said to me that they had brought up Richard Rohr at some point in one of their churches and been told that that was sinful. And somebody like Richard Rohr was leading people down all kinds of sinful ways into, tree worship and all this kind of stuff.
He certainly did for me, to be fair.
Tree worship.
Exactly. Endorsed. Right. And I mean that sounds kind of funny, but it can really extend into things like it's not just that people don't have space to kind of explore their faith, but there's no space to question or to doubt either. I've got a PhD student who's working on doubt in charismatic Christian churches at the moment, which is a huge issue. Not the issue of doubt, but the issue that the church is not really able to deal with it. They're not equipped to have good conversations and say, actually, doubt can be really helpful. That's okay to doubt, right? It's not a good business model. So there's that issue, and then that kind of shame, I suppose, extends outwards into other things. So things people spoke to me about would be, mental health issues, depressions. Somebody I spoke to had postnatal depression, and the church, again, there was no space for that to be discussed or spoken about. And those kind of awful issues of spiritual abuse. So it kind of starts with people don't have the space to think about their faith or spread their wings in that way. And then it becomes, actually, it's easier to control people. And it's much easier to kind of shame them and say, well, you're not a good Christian unless you believe what I believe.
Yeah.
And that's how we keep the church together. It's almost like a survival tactic, isn't it?
A lot of the things you're describing seem to me to be about institutions as well, don't they?
Yeah.
It's not even necessarily about individuals. It's about the way that institutions cluster and hold power and make decisions and exclude and include and all those things, and how the institution becomes bigger than even the big individuals within the institution. There's some kind of sense of being dwarfed by that. I'm just wondering if there is a model for a healthy institution or a healthy church institution.
Yeah, I think we spoke about that before, didn't we? We started to think about. Rob had said there were some characteristics of enlightened leadership and things that would be.
Sounds a bit grand, that, didn't it? Really?
Do you remember that, Rob? I think that was.
I do.
That was last time, wasn't it?
Well, it
Rob's
just
got the
strikes
answer.
me that the conversation, it makes me feel sad, I think, is my overwhelming feeling. And I'm sure you must have had all those sort of emotions, although, because you think, I suppose it's inevitable at some point that people will come and go. I think that's a matter of normal life.
Yeah.
People will come and go. And I remember from, they always used to say, have a big front door and a very small back door in a church. But it strikes me that in the world that we live in now, people have so many different inputs. Where I get my information or my inspiration or whatever come from numerous sources. It's the only thing limiting it is the time I have, isn't it, really, to listen to different sources of information. And I would have thought it sounds, I can't quite get my head around why anyone in a community would turn around and say, for example, listening to Richard Rory's sinful thought is going to lead you into, dangerous territory or something. You go, really? I don't understand why you would feel so defensive that you have to protect the ground you're on from some outside source. I don't get it. Help me understand, Katie.
It's difficult. Yeah, I still don't understand, Rob, honestly. I think there's something to people begin to panic, and I think we see this with the Quiet Revival report as well. I think people start to panic when there's a lot of information about churches, getting smaller and people leaving and all of this. And I think rather than panicking, one thing I will suggest when I write this into a book is that people don't imagine that the end of the church is the end of faith. I think we need to be a bit more imaginative than that. Yeah. But I suppose it causes people to act in ways that are, I spend a lot of my time working on things like trauma, and I think there's a defensiveness and a kind of, people are maybe a bit scared that they'll lose folk if everybody isn't on the same page. And so there is a tendency to say, well, look, we need to control what people consume and we need to control what people are thinking about. Otherwise they'll leave, and we don't want them to leave, when actually that's precisely the opposite to what they should be doing. Yeah. We should be allowing people to have that doubt, as you say, and have that space to think through what their faith means to them. And maybe that does involve being in a church, but I suppose what I'm suggesting is if it doesn't, that doesn't mean that it's the end of faith necessarily. Like sometimes it's better for people. I've met a lot of people who are doing much better not in a church.
Yeah.
When you say it's not the end of faith, if we're, I mean, we're looking at still a vast reduction in the number of church buildings in use. You know, in our area, I'm sure it's true in your areas too.
Yeah,
We're looking at a shrinking of the numbers of people that attend church services in a formal sense, with obviously some notable exceptions. We're looking at a loss of formal religion as almost like a sociological good within society. You know, that somehow, you know, professional ministers and priests who, and the functions they would, and the comings in and the goings out, that those things are not, you know, we're seeing more typically that it would be a celebrant of some sort who would who in Scotland aren't even allowed to mention God. Because
no, that's right.
It's like, I know it's not true in England, but it certainly is here. You know that you have to do that. So yeah. So if you're saying that it's not the end of God, but it would seem that how do you find vehicles to journey in without those kind of structures of church in the same sort of way that they would have been previously? So is it the end of some? It feels like the end of something.
Could be the end of something, and if it's the end of institutional church, that's a loss that we need to come to terms with and think about and reckon with, I think. So, you know, I'm thinking about it in terms of how do you have a good death of an institution like that? That's something I'm starting to think about. How do you pack all of that up? I don't think you do. I don't think it's neat. So my assumption would be it's not going to disappear completely quickly. Despite what we're hearing sociologically. And also, I think people still have an appetite for meaning. So one of the things I would agree with, the Bible Society are saying Gen Z, all those Gen Z kids, are really kind of open to spirituality. And I think that's true. I think that's absolutely true. And we'll still need to make meaning. We'll still need to think about the big questions in life. We'll need to think about death and dying, and we'll need to think about suffering. We'll need to think about how we look after one another in community. And I think the kind of key thing is we can't do that on our own. So we do need other people, and we do need outlets for that. So I think, and I said this to someone recently, and they said, well, this just sounds like church. I said, I think people will group together still in ways that might look like church. They might not look like institutional ways. They might look like house church or other alternatives. But I think there's something inevitable about people who want to explore God still finding each other and still being together, regardless of whether that's in an institutional setting or not. It seems quite clear. Yeah.
I think Dwight,
is now a good time just to kind of turn towards. No, on you go, Rob. Sorry, interrupting you.
No, I was just going to say one of the things we could probably do with doing on this podcast is to invite a minister on to talk about, not to well, if they feel they need to defend, then feel free. But actually, you know, when you, Katie, you were talking about, you know, characteristics of a more enlightened leadership, those must exist. I know that we've all got these stories of people.
I know one. Yeah.
And what does that look like?
I was just thinking about how does that work? I think I've got a friend. I'll tell you about him, and then I might suggest that you bring him on the podcast. But when you were talking about how do we have this good death of the institution, he's a Church of Scotland minister, and he's fully gone into the church knowing that it's not going to last forever, that he has aging congregations that he's working with. And he says, you know, his job is just to minister to them with that knowledge, and to look after them for as long as they need him. But he has a kind of wider sense of what's happening. And there's something about that form of leadership. So rather than saying, I'm a failure if I don't make up my numbers, or my ministry is not good unless I get more bums on seats, actually having taking all of that away, he fully centers himself on the people who are in this congregation, and they absolutely love him for it. And I think he creates such deep relationships with people because there isn't that constant, oh, well, so and so's not come back, or this person hasn't. Of course, go and look after people and chase your parishioners and make sure they're okay. But rather than it being a numbers game, which so much of the institutional church can be, there's a move away from that, which I think, Rob, on your list, that was kind of one of the things to think about, not forcing community, but allowing kind of natural gatherings, and also letting people question, letting people have organic ways of being together.
Yeah. I think questioning is crucial, and I imagine that at some point everybody who has grown up in a church, in an institution of church, will at some point have questions. Something will happen, or they'll just mature in what their understanding of things, or they'll get other inputs, and they want I'll speak for myself. I won't say most people. I say I would want a healthy conversation about that. I don't necessarily need people to agree with me, although that obviously would be kind of nice, but I wouldn't want to be rejected or feel excluded or considered difficult because of what I'm experiencing. I want people to just treat me normally. And if it doesn't, we're vulnerable, aren't we? And it doesn't often take much for us to trip up and say, right, that's it. I don't feel safe here anymore. Therefore, I'm going to jump ship.
Right. And that's a question actually that came up quite a lot as I've been presenting this research. People have asked, is it just folk throwing their toys out the pram and having a hissy fit and saying, well, I just don't want to be there anymore, and all of this? Sure, there are a few of those. Maybe I would even count myself among them, but there are far deeper issues that are really systemic, that really don't have anything to do with people being annoyed. And I think this is something that Steve Aisthorpe found as well, that a lot of people stay far longer than they maybe should in church situations that are uncomfortable or not kind of feeding them, and that's, to put it really politely, and in worst cases really spiritually abusive.
There will be a straw that breaks a camel's back, won't there? That this stuff is growing, and I've been wrestling with it personally for, let's say, 5 years or even longer perhaps, and slowly, I'm finding myself at more of a disconnect with. My perception is that I'm at more of a disconnect than I was before, until finally I can take no more. That sort of thing.
I hear that.
And that sounds like I'm throwing my toys. I'm not throwing my toys because it's the straw that broke a camel's back. So the final moment might look like Rob's thrown his toys, but actually these things have been rumbling, and anyone with eyes or ears to hear will have seen that those things were rumbling. Perhaps.
Yes,
I don't know.
Absolutely. And actually that happened for me, and it was a really quite kind of metaphorically poignant moment for me. So I left during a Bible study when somebody had started talking about the role of women in churches and how we should all just shut up and not be.
Did you storm out, Katie?
Well, I kicked a table over first.
Really?
I did.
Oh my word!
Wow.
I turned a table. I know. I really threw a hissy fit. I properly threw my toys out the pram, and it was a real moment of going, nah, I'm not doing this anymore. But that moment, as Rob has described, was fueled by so many years of just, I can, and I was across, I think, 3 or 4 different congregations by that point in my life I had been in. And lots of other kind of church activities that I've been doing for years and years. I've been really involved. And that was just the one thing that broke it, But there was so much going on. It was like the tip of the iceberg in terms of things that had happened to me in church. It was by far not the worst thing that had ever happened to me in a church. And that was the thing that kind of pushed the needle so to speak.
Not really surprised.
Yeah.
Although that's quite,
No, not at all.
I'd like to,
I-
kind of
I-
like to have been a fly on the wall. Sorry.
Honestly, it was terrible. I said some
Yes.
pretty bad words, and sometimes I look back at it and I think, oh, how terrible, and that was awful, and I really shouldn't have done that. And it's in moments of clarity and when I'm feeling generous, I think, oh gosh, I really that self-awareness, I shouldn't have done that. And then at other times I think, yeah, I kicked a table over and just stormed out. That was great. It felt really good.
It's funny. I hear that story in relation to to leavings that I've done as well, which never feel good. I mean, they might end up in a good place, but I think there's a lot of shame and trauma and difficulty that people go through in that leaving, isn't there? And even if
Absolutely.
it doesn't leave, it leaves a legacy of separation. And I still, I mean, back to what we were saying there about ministers and friends and people that are still actively giving and leading and shaping and community making in church. I just feel a little bit in awe of them because I don't know how they do it a lot of the time.
It's
How do you
incredible.
keep returning to that place of giving when you're exhausted and all the hard work of doing that? And it feels like an important thing for them to be doing, but
Yeah.
I'm just not. Yeah, I'm just not in that place.
It's not for all of us, I think, and that's really key. I think for some people there is an element of privilege that they haven't had to deal with some of the things that I've heard about or seen. But then for others, I think it's just that they have that call that they believe in, and it's really important to them to do the work.
Yeah.
So hats off to them, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, Rob, I'm getting this deep breathing coming to me through your headset. I now have identified what it is. I thought we had a hidden fourth caller who was kind of,
Sorry.
so I think perhaps just pull it slightly away from your nose.
Yes,
Maybe.
I have.
I
I've done
don't
that.
know.
I've done that. I didn't
Look,
really.
Yeah.
this man's a professional, and he
Yeah,
just needs
I
a
know.
professional podcast setup. That's
I
all
mean,
that we need
obviously,
to do.
we'll edit all of that out in the. My skills will kind of shape
Maybe
the
I was getting
sound so
more
it's
and
not
more
there.
annoyed at all the stories and thinking, oh,
Yes, that's right. Yes,
don't,
it's like
Yeah.
don't kick the table over, Rob. You know, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Oh dear.
Yes. I
so.
wouldn't advise it.
So I'm just conscious of time. So just it's probably important that we do look at this quiet revival stuff, isn't there? So
Yeah.
just because obviously what it says, Katie, is that we're wrong, and actually, if people don't know what we're talking about, the Bible Society commissioned a survey from YouGov, who obviously
Yes.
are, industry leaders in polling, set up by a Tory politician, but we'll forgive them that. And it was a large scale study that they did, which they claim busts the myth of church decline. So this is what they say about it. These striking findings that completely reverse the widely held assumption that the church in England and Wales is in terminal decline. Whilst some traditional denominations continue to face challenges, we've seen significant broad-based growth among most expressions of church, particularly Roman Catholicism and Pentecostalism. There are now over 2 million more people attending church than there were 6 years ago. So what they're saying is that now it's more men than women that attend church, which is another kind of total reversal of what we would have perhaps traditionally have seen. That they're saying that their survey had shown that 13% of men attend church, but only 10% of women. And that the church is also becoming ethnically diverse, with 1 in 5 people coming from an ethnic minority, and that close to half of young black people aged 18 to 35, 47%, are now attending church at least monthly. So there's a whole lot. If anybody wants to kind of check out this stuff, you can go to the Bible Society's own page. I think they do use some very bombastic language to describe this study. So we have been exchanging messages about this for some time and trying to kind of get a head around because one of the questions I had for myself in looking at this is, am I resisting this because of my own journey? Because I've gone from being, absolutely immersed in church. Almost like all my spare time was given to making church happen, to going through a process of trying to preserve church, because church seemed to be declining, and trying to get more people to come, and trying to do the seeker friendly stuff, to eventually saying, I can't do that anymore. I want to do church differently. So I've tried then doing church in lots of different ways, and then eventually couldn't do that anymore. Although ironically, I'm perhaps reconnecting with a form of church in that I'm now connected to the Iona community. So that whole journey of my leaving and seeing in the rearview mirror, the absurdities of things that we leave behind, because we always tend to emphasize that when we look back, don't we? Suddenly, this study would say, well, Chris, you got it all wrong. And actually, other people see it very differently, and people are flocking back to the church.
Yeah.
So, Katie, are we getting it all wrong?
Ooh, tricky. When I first saw it, I had exactly the same thought. There were kind of two sides of me, which are, of course, the same person. And one was my personal church leaving side. And I thought, God, this is not what I want to see, because this is, not my experience as a person, as a Christian, as, somebody who's out in the world. And then my academic side kicked in, and I went, aha, it's a YouGov study. No. Let me tell you a little something about YouGov. Now, this is not solely my own critique, so other people have picked this up as well. But the kind of gold standard of studies when you're looking at all of this information would be to base them on random probability samples of the whole population. So something like the British Social Attitude Survey. So the last time they ran that, it showed that the share of adults in England and Wales who said they were Christian and went to church at least monthly fell by nearly a quarter in the same kind of time that this study suggests that it went up. So I think it's between 2018 and 2023. And the report we're talking about is suggesting that churchgoers were basically doubling. The number of churchgoers were going up from 8 to, by about half, I think, 8% to 12% of the population. Now, the issue with YouGov survey panels is people join them, and you get rewarded after you do a certain number of YouGov surveys. So you do get an incentive. So the risk of having kind of lower quality answers, or even answers that are not good, is higher. And I have done YouGov survey panels before, and sometimes you get asked about things you have no idea about at all, and you will just click through to get to the reward. So David Voas, who's the Emeritus Professor of Social Science at UCL, so University College London, he's written a really good piece on the conversation about this, which picks up some of what I said and also kind of expands on it in a really helpful way. And he basically says that the issue with those responses are, well, first of all, the issue is that people will have self-selected in to answer this. So when they're saying, half of all people of this age, what they mean is half of all people of this age that have responded to the survey. Right. They do not mean half of all the population, because they can't mean that. They haven't done a random probability sample. So the methods by which they have done it are sketch in that sense. Not sketch, because I think YouGov does tell us a lot of things. I think the way that it works is democratic in that sense, but there's something about the study numbers that feel off to me. When I read it there, and the reason I know this is a bit more balanced is there are definitely things that make sense, right? So numbers of people who are from ethnic minority backgrounds going to church more, that makes sense. In somewhere like Aberdeen, where I live, we have these huge Nigerian Pentecostal churches that are very well attended by people who move to Aberdeen. And it makes a lot of sense, because religion is one way of preserving your culture, isn't it? To gather together. Same with Catholicism. Actually, Aberdeenshire in the past has been really off in terms of church attendance within different church surveys because of the number of Polish immigrants we have in Aberdeen. So when that went up about 10 years ago, so did the number of Catholic churchgoers as well. Okay. So there's those kind of things that sort of line up. But the other thing that people have been saying, which I think we need to listen to, is if church growth was happening and exploding in the way that this survey says it is, I think we would see it more, wouldn't we? It would be a lot clearer in people's accounts of church who are still going. And if anything, on the ground in my research, I don't have the numbers. I'm not a numbers person. That's not what I do. But I am encountering more people leaving, especially in the wake of COVID. So what I'm encountering, I think, lines up with stats from Church of England, British Social Attitude Survey, things like that. Yeah. So I would say that those correspond more with what I have found than the YouGov survey does.
I think in the course of our exchange of information, I think you sent me the Church Mouse blog article where they did break down the numbers quite well, and looked at, for example, pew information from the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, which does not map in any way onto the numbers given by the YouGov survey. So there is a problem there. I mean, how we deal with that problem is there was also a really good, if anybody's really interested in this, there's the statistics program on BBC Radio 4. What's it called? More or Less, is it called? Yeah. They did a long segment on this research too, where they were asking a lot of the same questions. What they were saying is either this is a very new trend since the last, because pew information is a year old, so all of that's changed in a very short space of time, which doesn't seem credible given the long kind of direction of that. Or there's something different about this survey, which talks about the self-selecting nature that you're talking about there, Katie. Or there's something about the questioning that's used, because there were one of the questions was, are you thinking about attending church in the last, and that was the one that really kind of seemed to kind of send up, things are changing. Although that in itself is interesting. If people are more willing to say, yes, I'm thinking about attending church, even if they don't attend church, that might be a new trend. We don't know.
It's interesting. And actually, I would say that corresponds with, if I was talking about Gen Z, the students that I teach, if you were to say to a class full of them, would you be interested in attending church? More so than my generation, I think they'd go, yeah, I wouldn't mind. Why not? I'd try it because they have an openness. But the other question is, at what point in the year are you asking that question? So you're asking it coming up to Christmas when people are thinking of, honestly, sociologically, it all makes a difference. You're asking it coming up to Christmas when people are thinking, I love Away in a Manger. I love the hymns. I love the carols. I want to make a Christingle. I don't know that anyone's ever thought that before, but, I want to go. And there's a reason for them going. Or if it's just the way that, as you say, Chris, it's phrased as, well, would you be interested? Would it, be something you would do? You're more likely to say, yeah, give it a go, rather than say no outright.
Yeah, and I suppose it's one survey. That's the other thing. So to make any statements around one survey feels very, very foolish, really. We need to kind of look at that in the context of much more inquiry.
Yes, definitely. And also thinking about who has commissioned it, how are they presenting it, and have they taken...
They're selling it hard, aren't they? That's the other...
they are. And how are they using it as well? And what other what other examples do we have? I mean, we have all these other, examples of church attendance declining. The other thing to say is church attendance does not equal adherence to faith, nor does it mean anything about membership. Like, you can attend without being a member. So those questions, I think, are still remaining questions. All of which to say, using YouGov to do a survey for an academic study is very standard. It's not a standard thing to do. But it's interesting seeing so much information to the contrary in the work I do. And then seeing this, at first I thought, oh my gosh, I've missed something really huge. And what have I missed? Yeah, I know. What am I doing? And then I read it and I thought, oh, actually, hang on a minute. Maybe not so much. Maybe, it's a good line and it makes sense. And it's good for people like, if you look at people who have run it as a news story, Premier Christian have run it, the Gospel Coalition,
Yeah.
evangelical focused, evangelicals now. It tells a story.
I've even seen it heard it talked about on American podcasts in a very unquestioning way, as if,
Yeah.
people are coming back. Even progressive Christian podcasts seem to be
Yeah.
uncritically accepting this as a new trend.
Yeah.
There's one more thing that I want to talk about quickly, though, about that is
Yeah.
just the Gen Z thing that you've mentioned a couple of times, and this suggestion, rightly or wrongly, and I think as you can hear our skepticism for the listener, but rightly or wrongly, the issue of young men. Because there are other, I mean, the other thing that's been quite kind of culturally significant at the moment is the book by, I should have remembered her name before I started this conversation. Young girl wrote a book about becoming a Christian. Basically, she started as an investigative journalist.
Oh, is
What?
it Lamorna Ash,
Thank you
maybe?
very much, Lamorna Ash.
Yes,
I
Lorna
remember
Ash.
before I asked the question, then it had gone out of my head. And
Yes.
it's one of those kind of books that seems to have exploded into. I mean, I first heard about it on a Novara Media kind of discussion, which is
Yeah, yeah.
a news outlet. It was nothing to do with Christianity. It's become quite mainstream. That her story perhaps sounds weird enough, but actually she talks about it with such intelligence and kind of passion as well. I mean, this is clearly a very real and meaningful experience for her that she's ended up in as a Catholic, actually. So
Yeah.
that also maps very well onto that YouGov survey.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
It's really, really interesting. I think it's a great book. And
have you
it's
read it?
I've read it. I think what's great about what Lamorna Ash does is one of the things that she kind of names rightly is that people inherit a lot of ideas and unquestioned assumptions about Christianity, and they just never think to question those. And one of the things that I think she does do quite well is that she starts to kind of pull apart those assumptions. And I think that's quite a Gen Z thing to do, right? They grow up in a world that's more diverse. They hear different points of view. They have access to them in ways that, we all now have, but they've grown up with completely differently. And so the other thing that Lamorna Ash does that I really like is she talks about doubt. And she says doubt is, an interesting thing and it isn't to be avoided. And I think it will be something that people will use. It's important to point out that she also says there are limitations to what she would believe and there are limitations to what she would engage with as well. So she says that she'll always support queer people, the LGBTQ community. She doesn't think it's fair for Christians to speak out on sexuality. A lot of Christian sexual ethics just kind of don't work with what she believes. But some of the other work that she does around that, I think, is kind of important to what we talk about and also to what Proust does. She does a lot with, speaking about how the Catholic worker movement and hospitality and things like working with asylum seekers, refugees, things like that. So I think those aspects are really appealing. Questioning is appealing. Thinking about hospitality is appealing. Does it
And
mean that she
also an
has,
apparent shift in theological kind of
yeah,
certainties as well within that, which
yeah,
is
yeah, definitely. So I think there is an intelligence to that, which is, okay, maybe I have found this and I've, got a particular way of seeing things, but that's not how everybody needs to behave or what everybody should do. And, I think there's a good nuance to that writing that I've appreciated when
yeah.
I've read it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's important.
I'm just
surely,
looking at
that
the
there's
time
some
now, people.
space.
I'm
It's a bit
sorry.
late, isn't it?
No, don't apologise. My word, this is
Goodness.
this is it makes us think we should do a series of discussions about this, Katie,
Oh no, I
not just
know.
one. But I'm conscious that Rob, we had at least one more question, didn't we? Which was this. I don't know whether you've got other things that are burning in that you want to talk about, Rob. But there was this question that we had at the beginning, which is the outcome stuff of this. And I know research isn't supposed to map neatly onto a set of therefore we will do A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
But that's what I want from you. I want an
Great.
idea of, okay, on the basis of all this research that you've done,
Yeah.
this is how we can respond. This is how we should respond. Even this is what church should
Yes.
look like. That I'm
Yeah.
going to form on the basis of my research.
Yeah.
For
Well,
which
it's
people
tricky.
attend and then leave.
It's so tricky, isn't it? I think I'm going to give a really annoying, open-ended academic answer and say I
Oh,
think all human institutions will always be tricky. The ones that still exist need to really dig down and think about the things that are going wrong, and the major things being systemic issues of racism, also things like sexual abuse, all these different scandals that are happening really need to be thought about, safeguarding issues, um, in ways that don't just kind of pay lip service to what is going on, but actually you might need to upend institutions and change them in radical ways. That's kind of not what I'm looking into. I'm just thinking about how people can be Christians beyond the church. And so most of what I'm suggesting is yes, they can be, and we should be less afraid of that as an option. Because theologically, there are plenty of good reasons for not existing within a church community if that is the path that you're going to travel. And it is a path that many have travelled historically. We're not alone, so there'll be a lot of content on that when I write this up. And also that, looking forward, what will that look like? What are some of the things that people at the moment are doing? How might that inspire people to be in the future as well?
okay.
So that's all on you. If you have any good ideas, this is why I crowdsource the ideas.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting. Rob and I were talking just before we started, just because I'd confessed to him that I'm at the moment I just throw my hat in the ring to go through the 2 year discernment period to be
Yeah.
a full member of the IOLA community, which is
Yes.
we share a common associateness. Unless you've left that as well, that's
Oh no, I'm still very much
okay.
associated. Yeah, yeah.
So it's that, I suppose, for me, the structural issue still is a live one. So because I know that your answer was much more about reflective practices and corrective practices in
Yeah.
institution. I suppose I'm still interested to know whether there are other kinds of institutions, either that are already here or that we need to kind of be, sort of imagining or reimagining again. I know nothing's new; we've done it all before, but there seems to me, I mean, dispersed community might be one of those, but I'm just wondering if there are other vehicles that might yet prove to be important or useful.
I think so. And I think that's also going to depend on things like what I'm noticing is how technology is changing and how we're connected. So that idea of dispersed community becomes more accessible.
Yeah.
And also thinking about, yeah, including people who haven't been able to include themselves in church or for any reason haven't found that accessible. So I think there's plenty going on. I would say I learn the most from people who have had to leave the church for reasons of accessibility and what they're doing because they've done it out of necessity. They've had to say, well, I can't go physically to church, so
Yeah.
how am I going to do this? And that tends to be kind of where most of the imagination comes from. But I think it's a tricky thing to do something that's kind of unfolding, isn't it? Because it's also like, well, we'll have to wait and see. It's sometimes the best answer we can give. I think what Proust is doing is good. I think the mycelium event sounds like the kind of thing that my research would point towards as being a really helpful kind of framing for that. Yeah.
By accident.
By accident.
Yes,
Yeah.
we've stumbled across something. Rob, anything
Yeah.
else from you?
Super. No,
I've
that's
said too
fantastic.
much recently.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you, Katie. Really,
Great.
really
Thank you.
very
Thanks for
helpful.
having
There's
me.
so much we could talk about.
I
So
know,
Indeed.
much we could
honestly,
Yeah.
talk
there's too
about.
much. That's it.
Well, yeah, Katie, thank you so much from me too. That's been a really
Thank
good
you.
and stimulating and interesting and pithy kind of chat, which is just the sort of stuff we enjoy. So thank you so
Yes.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.